Welcome you all. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming. So this is really our opportunity to kick off our search for a city manager. We wanted to start with a community conversation with all of you. As a reminder, as we've been talking about on the City Council, our current city manager, Suzanne Ludlow, is retiring as of July 1st of this year. And so the City Council, one of our roles and responsibility is the hiring and the overseeing of the city's city manager. And so we're looking for community input in the recruitment and hiring of a new city manager. And we really want to hear residents' opinions regarding the attributes you'd like to see in the next city manager, as well as, what are the things that you see as the most important issues facing the city and how the next city manager can help us move forward on those issues. So what are we going to do tonight? As I mentioned, there were nearly 30 people who had signed up for this evening. Because we want to have a conversation and a discussion, as you can see, like when we get to more than like 10 people, it's hard to see everybody on Zoom. So we're going to use the breakout group function in a little bit. We're going to pair members of the City Council together and with some city staff to go into the breakout rooms with residents. One person will ask the questions. We have 4 questions, but you don't have to limit it to that. And then the other person will take notes. And then we'll do that for about 40 minutes, and then we'll come back together and have some time to have the group share out, or people, if they hadn't had the opportunity to share during this discussion, some other things, and continue the conversation. We are recording this section of the meeting, and we will also record when we come all back together, but there's no function to be able to record the individual breakouts, so those will not be recorded. To kick us off before we do go into our breakouts for a little bit, the City Council thought it would be helpful to have Jim Peck speak to us. He is from the Maryland Municipal League. The Maryland Municipal League is an organization that the city of Takoma Park belongs to. It represents municipalities, cities across the state of Maryland. And Jim is pretty much an expert on, and as we were just talking about before, knows a lot of history about municipal government in the state of Maryland. And because sometimes it can get confusing about what kind of form of government we have, what does a city manager actually do, what is their authority, we thought it would be helpful to have an expert like Jim kind of talk about that for a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over to Jim now, and I think I can spotlight him so everybody can see him. There you go, Jim.
Good evening, everyone. A key issue in council manager form of government is that the mayor and council is the legislative and policy arm of government, and the manager is the chief administrative or chief executive officer for the municipality. The manager drafts and monitors the budget, implements policy that the mayor and council make, enforces ordinances, and oversees the day-to-day operations of the municipality. Managers charged with hiring, firing staff, and in many cases, there are charter provisions which say to the elected body, to the extent that you want to deal with staff, you want to deal with them through the city manager, and it clarifies their role to have that within the charter. Basically, that is it. The difference, some of you think of the mayor in a municipality as the chief executive officer. and some municipalities have that form of government. But for the council manager form, there is a separate person who oversees the executive function, and the mayor does not get into that role whatsoever. And basically that is it. To the extent that you have questions, I'm happy to chime in, but what distinguishes the council manager form of government is fairly straightforward.
Hi, Jim. Can I ask you a quick question? It's great to see you. You were with the league like 30 plus years. Can you tell us the history why Maryland has this form of government, the sharing of power?
Well, okay, in terms of other municipalities where the mayor and council might have a commissioner, or might have an administrative function also.
Right. Yes.
Well, aside from the council manager form of government, there are two other primary forms of local government in not just Maryland, but throughout the United States. In the strong mayor form of government, the mayor, in fact, is the chief executive officer. The mayor does not actually sit on the council, though the mayor frequently will preside over council meetings. The mayor oversees day-to-day operations, oversees the staff, does hiring and firing of staff, sometimes with the input of the remainder of the legislative body. That there are a number of municipalities that have that, though not a great deal in the state of Maryland. There's also a weak mayor form of government where the mayor and council are all members of the legislative body. And the mayor has no executive function in that fashion. The elected body frequently will hire an administrator who is not actually the executive, but does many of the administrative functions. And finally, a commissioner form of government exists where the members of the elected body are also, each one of them have an administrative function. And frequently members will be given oversight of various functions of the city. So you might have a police commissioner, you might have a public works commissioner. And that is an older form of government, which is, in many cases being changed. Municipalities amend their charters to go to another form of government. The municipalities in Maryland that have that form of government tend to be smaller municipalities with little staff. But city manager form of government came into being at the turn of the last century. I think it was in probably about 1912, where the first municipality in Maryland created a council manager form of government, and it has grown ever since. In the state of Maryland, the larger municipalities tend to have a city manager form of government, council manager. So Rockville, Gaithersburg, Bowie, many of the larger municipalities do incorporate that form of government.
Thanks, Jim.
Great. Does anybody else have any other questions?
If nobody
Yes.
else has.
Yes, I have a question. Just for
Go ahead.
clarification. So basically, in our form of government, they determine, the city is really run by the city manager. They hire and fire. You mentioned something about implementing policy, but it's not clear who makes that policy, whether they make it and the council and mayor either approve or disapprove it, or the council and the mayor make the policy. So I had that, and you said that they present a budget for approval, but are they the ones that decide what goes in the budget and make the final decisions on what changes? I know there's lots of hearings and stuff like that, but I'm just wondering on, it seems like a city manager in our form of government has tremendous amount of power and they're not elected. If I'm wrong, please correct me.
Well, the role of the elected body remains as the policy-making role. The mayor and council pass ordinances which have the effect of local law. The mayor and council approve the budget and any amendments to the budget that occur during the course of the year have to go before the elected body to be approved. The primary role of the city manager is to ensure that the policies that the elected body approve are carried out, and that the budget as approved by elected body is implemented and overseen. That the city managers throughout the year should be keeping the elected body apprised of what is happening with the budget, to the extent that there are changes needed, and incidentally, a budget is essentially a plan, and things change during the course of the year, so that to the extent that circumstances arise, the city manager will return to the elected body and note need for movement of funds from one area to another because of changing circumstances. But again, it's the mayor and council that make the policy and approve the budget. They then turn it over to the city manager to enforce that policy and ensure that the budget is used to do the things that the elected body sought to make happen.
Great. Cindy, did you also have a question before we break into rooms?
It was similar to the one that
Gina?
to expand on the different functions between the city council and the city manager. And I did have one specific question about something you said earlier. You said that in some cases there's a specific city charter function beyond the general municipal functions that the Maryland communities with this form of government have. Do you happen to know if there's anything specific in the Takoma Park Code? I'm not aware of anything that's different from overall the standard municipal forum here that we're talking about, but I thought I'd just double check with the expert.
Actually, I do have a copy of the charter, and I can review it, and I certainly take me a couple of minutes, but I can get back to you if you want to proceed with the meeting.
Okay, thank you.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead, Neil.
Just in terms of the last question, I've always wondered this. Is it not a fair analogy, and I was a few minutes late, so I apologize if the statement was made. Is it not a fair analogy to make the analogy that the city manager is basically the CEO and the city council and mayor are basically the board of directors of the city. And is that a fair analogy?
Welcome back. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and sticking with it. This is the crew. We actually didn't lose that many people in the end of the day, so that's really good to know. So we have about 29 more minutes. We thought what we would do now is if folks want to, we had 4 different breakout rooms. And I don't know if maybe we could just go around in some of the different breakout rooms, could just kind of, if you want to say some highlights, some of the big themes that were came out of your room, so we could share with the whole group. So the first room, I guess Pete was in that room with Tracy taking notes. Were there any big themes? And you don't have to cover everything, but any big themes you'd like to share with the overall group? And it can be someone else from your group too, if they want to share. And I think you're on mute, Peter.
Sorry. Believe it or not, I wasn't the note taker, although I took notes. We had a great conversation. And it was specifically, in addition to Tracy, Marcel, Nadine, and Sue. So a lot of time to talk about it. A lot of interesting things were put forward. I think I let Tracy go through some of the specifics, but just a few things that stood out to me, and the people in the group can add afterward they wish. One question that was brought up was the idea of wanting the new person to be able to live here, to being better connected to the residents. There was a lot of talk about communication, engaging in different ways with residents. There was some talk about following along and doing what the council wants, as opposed to doing, initiating things that didn't come from the council. Balance question, and what things might look like in 5 years, sustainability and green city, and still having a small town feel. There was talk about both keeping some of our businesses and potentially having maybe a bigger business. The hospital was to attract people to want to live here, and certainly, and then I'll stop and let Trey anything else. Making sure that the Takoma values, and maybe we all define those in slightly different ways, but are embodied within the person that we get it, and are fully laid out in the document that we send out, the announcement, so that we really emphasize things like racial equity and economic diversity and rent control, so that like the Washington Post seemed to, in that recent article they wrote the other day, that it's just a well-off town with a lot of single-family homes. So it's getting across that that's not just a description of the city, but that's actually a value that we have. And I'm sure I've forgotten a lot of other things. So if Tracy wants to add anything, and certainly other people who were there, any of the 3 who participated, can also jump in.
Okay. Tracy or anybody else in the group?
Yep, there was a whole lot of discussion, a lot of really excellent points. I think the main couple that really stuck out was transparency, to listen and engage residents, and then be able to take that and put it into action. And then also, again, really just keeping in line with the priorities and what's the word? The values that Takoma Park has, and really making sure that we are focused on those and getting somebody in that will help promote those.
And I think one of the really interesting point was made, which I don't know exactly whether this is something that would only kind of emerge in an interview phase, but the point was that in addition to the obvious sort of things that could show up in someone's resume, like do they have experience in developing a budget and managing people and those kinds of things, trying to elicit some different kind of information or a different sense about the person through asking some maybe less traditional questions, like what's an example of a time when you had, a set of decisions that raised, moral questions, and how you had to engage with a section of your community, and how did you resolve it, or who were some of the people that you either admire or look to in helping guide you, or at least helping ground you in decisions that you make. And so I don't know that we've resolved this tonight, but maybe for ourselves, when we think about this, ways of going beyond the basic traditional things that we definitely do also need, which is understanding budgets and HR and
Well, I think that was something that actually, I think, I can't remember, it was Councilwoman Costick or CRC had, because as I mentioned before, we also have an online survey that went live today. So if you got your Takoma Insider while you were actually in your group, you can do that too tonight. But one of the questions we actually didn't include because it kind of lengthy was that question of like, you have, like kind of interview questions you would ask the city manager applicants. And I think we're gonna probably do another outreach before we have actual interviews set up, and we'll get people's input on that as well.
And one last thing, I mean, there was concern about what level the pay would be pegged at, and whether that could be adjusted downward from its current level.
Anybody in the group want to add anything to that report out?
Desire for somebody with the skills and the excitement about reforming the budget process and making it more transparent.
Great. Terrific. Let's see, the second group, is Talisha, you're in there with Jesse. And I heard Patty was doing double duty as a resident and a city staffer. So I don't know which one of you wants to talk a little bit about your group.
I could start, and then Patty definitely fill in the gaps. And I don't want to be repetitive, but there were a number of themes that this group had that were in common with the prior group. So one of the things that was discussed, of course, was a big theme was community engagement. Making sure that whoever is selected is interested and wants to engage with the community on various issues, from the budget, from aspects of policing, and also some of our other priorities. Another big thing that was discussed was having someone who either has experience or is in an area where there's a lot of cross-jurisdictional coordination that needs to happen. There was quite a bit of chat about, what is the role of the city from, the perspective of the city and the county and our neighbors, right? And how do whoever we bring in can kind of coordinate and address those cross-jurisdictional issues. There was discussion about visioning and making sure that who comes in has the ability to vision and engage in long-term planning, but also, again, bringing the community along. So it's, hey, we develop not just the community, I should say the community and staff, right? So how can you find someone who can come up with these visions and understand the plans of execution that's communicated from the council, bring in residents so that they can provide input, but also be able to clearly communicate that down to staff, was a big thing. And I'm going through my notes. There were a number of priorities that were discussed, and they were in line with some of the current council priorities: stormwater management, economic development, policing. One thing that was also tax revenues, those things were brought up. Another thing that was brought up was the idea of, making sure that whoever we bring in understands that, our little city can be the model, and that that's a value of progressiveness that we have, and making sure that that's communicated. And I'll pause, Patty, to see any other areas that weren't covered by the first group that was discussed. Oh, I should say the soft skills were also discussed, like making sure, and one of the challenges, and there was this kind of in-depth conversation about the juxtaposition between wanting someone that can do everything, be an expert in everything, and being realistic. And so how do you kind of balance that, like that technical expertise versus some of those soft skills, and how do you kind of make sure that someone has that right mix? And then Patty, I promise I'm done. Like, jump in.
No, that was really good. The only other priority that we talked about that I don't think you mentioned was sustainability, climate change priority. We talked about that a little bit too. And that was part of, like, you know, in 5 years, again, like being a model for those kinds of things. Yeah, a lot of time was spent on budget. A lot of time was spent on community engagement. Transparency was said quite a bit, and how to communicate those priorities outward, but also encourage the input from residents and negotiate relationships. Like Lisa said, you know, whether that means just among residents and staff and council, or it means across jurisdiction, because we're in the middle of so many borders. I think someone said, you know, like we're the land of borders around here. Yeah,
Like that land of borders.
Did we miss anything? Anybody else?
Cool.
I did put a plug in for the Reimagining Public Safety Task Force applications due tomorrow, because that whole policing safety conversation happened in our group. And I do want to encourage folks, if you're interested in that longer term and you want to be involved, get your applications in, because we want a good representation of residents on that committee.
Are there still openings for older white guys?
I'm not choosing.
You're welcome.
Terry, sorry.
Let's see, room 3, Casey and Terry, we're leaving the discussion there. Do you guys want to kick it off, and then we can open it up to other folks?
Sure. I took notes so I can kind of run through some things, and then others please chime in. A lot of what we talked about, I think I've heard some similarities in what others have said from their groups. We talked about wanting someone who is good about follow-up with residents, who communicates with residents and is accessible, someone who is open to new ideas and open to residents coming with new ideas and willing to integrate those into the process. Someone who can work well with the police department and on public safety issues and has experience with that. A little bit different, I think, than what we've talked about earlier in terms of kind of doing the big picture, cutting edge things. We had a discussion about also making sure that the smaller things are a part of what the city manager is focusing on, and not necessarily the bigger scale projects, but the smaller accomplishments that might be doable and take less time. We talked about someone who upholds our values, who can really help us move forward with being a welcoming place and a place of diversity, and encouraging us to move past being a community where we have a lot of segregation, and bringing in more voices to the community discussions and the city discussions. We also talked about tax duplication and working with Montgomery County, using Montgomery County resources where that's doable, as in combination with city resources, and not duplicating those. Let's see, we talked about a lot of the projects that are major multi-year projects, and the city manager needing to have a background in dealing with big projects, and being able to manage those things, as well as to delegate to city staff and have good working relationships with staff members, external partners, and residents. And we also talked about the importance of a city manager listening to feedback very early on in a project, so that that can be integrated into the project plans as it moves forward, and wanting the city manager to have opinions, but also being open to new ideas. I think one summary in terms of the relationship between council and manager that we talked about that might be useful is wanting the council to have a say in what the city is doing, but the city manager to give advice on how it might be done. And then we also talked about the different opinions of residents and the different perspectives and the shifting of those perspectives and the importance of working with the community on that as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think, AJ, you have to tell everybody else what your quote, your description of the city, your Hydra.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. So Takoma Park opinion, I mean, all of us work together on independent little ideas, but as a whole, as a group, we're a multi-headed Hydra, and it's built on shifting sands. You know, we'll have one opinion one day and another opinion another day, and there is no way to sort of clearly define our process. We all work from imperfect information, and we get it from listservs and our neighbors and whatever. And one way to combat that is by having better communication from the city manager. And so we're dealing with the same set of facts. It's like the city manager becomes kind of like our newspaper, the final arbiter of what is real and what is true. And so we spend less time snapping at each other on listservs and more time dealing with, like, okay, we've got this project. What do we want to move on it? How can we get a well-informed opinion on it and let our city council members know?
Cool. Anything else from group 3?
Yes, I just wanted to add on to what Casey had taken in her notes and said about, but I think there's a big emphasis on communications in several different ways, that how important communications and communicating abilities with the new city manager are. And the other thing that, and again, Casey mentioned this, but there seemed to be an emphasis on not just what they would like to see in a new city manager, but what they'd like to see from the council, as far as making a clearer distinction between what the council does and what the city manager does, with the council setting the policy and making the decisions, and the city manager being an implementer, and thinking that this is probably the good time to clear that line up a little better. And then lastly, on the big projects that Casey mentioned, there was the importance of the new city manager being able to handle so many big projects that we have on the table right now, but also the wall property and how impactful that's going to be on the whole community. And so again, wanting to see the council and the new city manager really focused on the challenges that we have there and the opportunity we have there to make big change in the city, but at the same time ensure that we keep the city values and the character of the city that we have now.
Great. Room 4. I had, what is that? Jared and Cindy.
Cindy took notes for us. Cindy, would you like to do the overview and I can jump in?
I'll start, yeah. So some of the same themes. We talked a fair amount about citizen engagement as being really critical. And one person pointed out that is also a staff management challenge, because staff tends to hear from citizens, they hear negative comments with a positive intent is how this person put it. And so working with staff so that they, not just the city manager, are prepared to engage with residents and take the positive from what sometimes is negative feedback and use it. And I thought that was particularly instructive. But several other people mentioned citizen engagement in one form or another as being really key. There was a little bit of talk about the city manager representing the full demographics of Takoma Park, either literally representing the demographics of Takoma Park, or just being aware of different types of people, different walks of life, different issues and concerns, and being able to interact with a range of folks who are coming from different places in terms of their day-to-day concerns. The one person laid out several criteria in terms of a city manager being budget conscious, being able to deal with metrics, and thinking about cost effectiveness, not just the cost, and being able to have good supervision management skills, both staff and contractors. And we talked a little bit about balance with the city budget. So budget was a concern in our group. A lot of talk about not so much transparency, but clear, plain English translations of what's in the budget, what's not, how did we get there, what are the revenues, so that people can engage with the issues that they need to, rather than spend a lot of time learning the budget details themselves. As far as there was also that we had the similar conversation about reflecting Takoma Park values, that the city manager, it's important for them to understand them, to act within them, and to reflect them, to promote them. Some of the themes, some of the topical themes that came up in terms of 5 years from now were climate and sustainability, equity, going back to the questions about diversity that were raised earlier, and engaging youth, because they're the leaders of tomorrow. We had an interesting, I almost said sidebar. It's a little off topic for city manager, but it's very important. So if the city council priorities are essentially the values we're reflecting, can they be captured? I know there's that little poster, but can they be widely shared? Can they be promoted? Can they be used as a guide with all of the decisions that city manager and council make? So we got a little bit into the staff versus the manager versus council role as well. And I think that's the high points. Anybody else want to add something I missed?
I would just jump in and say that, thank you, Cindy, for taking notes for us. And thank you, everyone, for participating. I think people are concerned about the opaqueness of the budget. People just don't understand, how is the budget prepared, what role council has, and how do we, make these decisions. I think that is a critical theme. How to make sure that the money that we spend as a council has some impact on whatever it is, whether it's a program, whether we are really looking at decisions on adding a head count. How is that really going to help the mission, the goal of the city? Whether or not we should hire more contractors. I think the budget is critical for many members that were in our group. I think what is the values of Takoma Park? Takoma Park is changing. There are a lot of new residents that are moving in the city, but Takoma Park has, this thing, right? And people want to make sure that it is anchored in the decisions that the council makes and the future city manager makes, so that we have these goals, that we have this vision, and that whatever decisions that we are looking to make, that we are looking at how they reflect these goals and vision that are our city, and people are concerned about what Takoma Park is going to be, what it's going to look like, 3, 5, 10 years from now. And it is our responsibility, I believe, that we make sure that what we have all envisioned and feel is Takoma Park remains in Takoma Park.
Great. Anyone else from that group want to share? All right. Anything else? We have a few minutes left. I'd love to hear if there's anything that didn't get said that you want to lift up as we're going through this process.
Yeah, Kate, it's Randy.
Yeah,
I made my pitch for this city manager hiring process to be the first step in a long-term visioning process, which you and Casey have heard ad
Yep.
nauseum by now. So I just wanted to flag that for other residents, that no one knows what the new normal is going to look like. And we should be asking the question of, what do we want the city to look like in 2050? And what do we want the city to look like in 2025 or 2026? So that when we hire the city manager, we have someone who'll lead us in that direction.
Yeah, I really like somebody was saying before, I can't remember which group it was, about being visionary the long term, and also thinking about the what we have before us right now, because we have like some major projects, things happening now.
Kate, didn't you and the council do several, this is pre-COVID, of course, you did several visioning retreats and statements. Has that been thrown out the window, or is that still the
No,
basis
we
for
do
this?
it. We started this about 5 years ago. And we're actually in the middle of updating it this year. We have we have 5 priorities, and last night we discussed actually adding a 6th one, which is specifically on COVID. But we do have our 6 overarching priorities, and underneath them, core goals and strategies for working towards those. So it is something that we look at every year. We have discussions on. We pass a resolution adopting it, and usually picking out like 3 to 5 of them to really make sure we're focusing on for the upcoming year. And it is what the city staff use as their jumping off point for their budgets.
Okay, so when we're talking about visioning now, we should be at least starting with the platform of what already exists and the adjustment that we're trying to make with regarding COVID. And I don't know whether there was a lot of discussion at that time when the original one was done about responsiveness or resilience for shocks that come from unexpected emergencies. I don't know. But
well, that's actually one of the things that why we put in a number of years ago. I think we did it the first or second year I was mayor, is we did not have a reserve policy in the city. And that is one of the things that we worked on, and was under our goal of fiscally responsible government, is having a reserve policy in the city. And that's really the impetus of it, is to make sure that when we do have, as you see, Jean, these shocks and jolts, that we have a good fiscal, financial foundation. So
so just so that when people come in and out of this conversation over the years, it's not expected to start from scratch on the visioning. There is a vision. You're proposing to make some adjustments to it. I don't know, because I haven't been paying enough attention, whether there have been metrics associated with each one of the major areas. Like you just mentioned, a really good one, that you, as part of the visioning, to be fiscally responsible, you had to have a reserve policy, and you did a reserve policy. I assume you're putting money into reserves. That would be something that's a concrete, objectively verifiable thing that you did. And that's what I would like to see. Because
we're working towards more and more benchmarks. But for example, a couple of years ago, one of the key things that we had under a livable community for all was to develop a strategic plan on affordable housing and economic development. And we went through a 3-year process, and now have our strategic plan. And in that strategic plan, then within that, we have key goals and strategies that we're working towards, specifically on housing and economic development. But I'd like to bring this back to
sounds reasonable. That sounds great, and I hope it will be, as you go along, you say this is what we've done since then. This is what we need to do. This is our short-term objectives. So it just means like you're not starting all over in sort of a kumbaya. What kind of thing do we want without having a basis to start from?
Yeah. So I think it's 8 o'clock, but I do want to just, bring it back to any other thoughts as we're on this journey to hiring a new city manager in the city? I do want to do a plug for the online survey. Please fill that out, pass it along. We are getting it translated into Amharic, Spanish, and French. And that will be, that just needs to be programmed into SurveyMonkey as well. We had ran into a little hitch today, so that wasn't programmed yet. So
Okay, one other item that I think is of note from our discussion in our breakout room was the need for the city manager to be, I use the term strong enough to deal with the police department, because that's an area that we've struggled with in the past. And so that was one of the important characteristics.
yeah, the strong, yeah, yeah. I think particularly for the city manager of our city, when we look at other cities our size, I think we can't forget the fact that we do have a police department and that the city manager oversees the police department. I think that's a very important factor because I think there are a number of other cities that may be around our size in Montgomery and like Prince George's County, but they don't have full service police departments like we do to manage. So at least for now. So.
And then one other question that came up, I went back after the Zoom bomb or whatever they call it. I went back to the original room and talked with some of the people who were there. And we still had a question for Mr. Peck, and that was, what other jurisdiction? They said that, Takoma Park's not so small. We don't have a weak mayor, as you know. And he was asking, well, what other municipalities are there in Maryland that are smaller than Takoma Park and have that? All I'm saying is there was still some leftover questions from that discussion.
Yeah, so actually one of the things I was going to ask our city clerk, Jesse Carpenter, to do, who is still online, I think, is since we have everybody's email address who participated this evening and even folks who might have got kicked off, Mr. Peck did offer that his email address is jimp@md.municipal.org, and Jesse can send that out to folks. And this is his job, is to really, he does research on municipal issues, legal issues, and talks to people about municipal government. So he said he was more than happy to answer any more questions that we might have. So we can send out his email again on that.
I guess one of the questions I would have for the council, and you don't have to answer it right now, is what decisions is the council with the mayor not able to make? I mean, I'm not clear on how much independence a city manager has. There's a lot of discussion about informed and collaboration, but if it came down to this is a hypothetical, a major difference of opinion, and who would have the power to put their foot down and saying, no, this is the way we're going to do it?
Well, so I can answer that quickly. So the one thing is that the city council does not oversee the city staff. So we have no, except for the city manager, we have no hiring or firing or disciplinary authority over city staff. So that's really the city manager. But I think one of the things that's always important to remember is that the city manager the city council oversees the city manager. And, we do evaluations every year. So obviously, if there's things that the city manager isn't doing well, even though we may not directly be able to say, do this on this personnel issue, we then do evaluate them each year, and we ultimately have the authority to continue retaining them or requesting they leave the city. So
that's the only time you have the input. I'm using hypotheticals here, but for a situation, let's just say this, I have no intimate implication that this is the case. It's a hypothetical. If there was a supervisor of staff who was sexually harassing an underling, a subordinate, and that was known, and
We have an
hypothetical
ethics,
city manager
we
didn't
have an
do
ethics.
anything about it. The council essentially could advise,
We know we
talk to
have
the-
actually, and the city clerk might be able to answer this question. We actually have an ethics commission and procedures in place for things like that.
For making sure something like that. Okay.
If there is improper conduct by a city employee and a hypothetical city manager was not taking action, we do, I don't know if the city clerk has any other information, but we do have things in place, not only for council members, but obviously members of the city staff themselves.
Right,
So.
and we also have on this call the Human Resources Director who could provide an even better response to that particular question. But yeah, there are ways of dealing with things like that.
Okay, I guess that was, I mean, we're all hyper aware of lack of accountability and thinking, we saw so much happening at the national level where we kept thinking, well, they must have a way to do something about this. Why aren't they doing something? And it turned out that was exposing vulnerabilities that up until now we didn't know about because it hadn't happened before. So that's kind of that oversight role, because when we vote for you. We don't vote for the city manager, or we don't vote for whoever heads the rec department or whatever. So that will be important to, I think there was some discussion in our group about not treating city staff rightly because of whatever, I don't know, I haven't run into this myself, but when there's a question about how an employee of the city is operating, the thing we have legitimately is to go to our elected representatives who then have to take action, but they don't have any authority. They can just talk to it. But if you're saying there are lots of personnel procedures, or I'm not really talking about somebody, in this case, not malfeasance, but just if somebody's not happy. And
I mean, the other thing is, like, even a city council member, we know Tracy. We can also talk to Tracy if there is, and we have unions in our city as well. So, I think there are a number of levels of, if we're talking about a personnel thing, that it's that are a check on, and that an issue can be brought to light or brought to the attention of people. It wouldn't just land on the city manager's desk.
One other thing I would mention, and this is not directly about human resources and what Gina is talking about, but in terms of where the sort of authority lines lie. One of the residents mentioned earlier this model that it's like the CEO and the board of directors, but there is one slight difference there that I think complicates it, because technically, the board of directors, I don't know, they approve themselves, or the shareholders approve them, or they're appointed by the CEO. But this definitely is different in that if we're the board of directors, we're chosen by the residents. And so it's not as if we're just these people on the board who can do what we want. We're there to represent the voters. And so I don't think the CEO board of directors analogy is quite totally apt, because there's this other through line there of, we're representing the people who vote for. So I just mentioned that as another component of the sort of countervailing forces or powers that are involved here. And I'm not saying, therefore, leads to what we need to do in a specific way with the city manager, as much as just it's an observation of another dynamic at stake in what we do, for what it's worth.
Great. Well, this is just tonight, as I said, is a start. Just to highlight again what we'll be doing moving forward on next Wednesday, February 10th, at our city council meeting. We'll have a work session on this. We'll kind of give some highlights of this evening. We did, as I mentioned it earlier, we did record it, and that will be available, and we'll put it up on the city's website on the page where we have the information about the city manager search. We'll also be joined by the person that we've hired to help us in this search, Catherine Tucker Parrish, will join us on Wednesday night. And after we'll have the online survey, maybe we'll have some quick results if everybody gets it out there and gets people to answer, that we can talk about on Wednesday night. And then we are also, Councilmember Kovar and Kostick are helping put together stakeholder focus groups for the Catherine to talk to as she develops and thinks about our search process. We will be putting together a job announcement and like a brochure about the city that will go out to potential applicants. And then in probably late spring, we'll start getting applications in and narrow those down for interviews. So as we're going through the process, we'll continue to talk to members of the public. In addition, I'm sure my colleagues, as they normally do, have ward meetings and other things that might also continue this conversation that we started this evening. And I think, am I missing anything? I think that covers it, right? I think we
Can you
covered
just
it. Okay.
clarify
Well,
the survey you're sending it out, are you sending it out to all city residents that you have an email for, or is it just going for those that have subscribed to the Insider?
well, we don't have an email list in the city outside of the Insider. That's pretty much it. But what we're doing is that we're putting it on Facebook and social media. And we're asking the obviously our council members to send that out on their own channels on all of the listservs, asking all of you as residents to also send it out to people you know. And in particular, as I mentioned, we are translating it into Amharic, French, and Spanish. And so making sure that it gets to our residents for whom that is their dominant language. And we will also make available, if we need to, if people would prefer to have a paper copy, we can do that as well.
Okay, I just wanted to know that there'll be a link. Casey is our council person and she does interact regularly with WACO's listserv.
Yeah.
But there are a number of people on Eastern Avenue that are not engaged with WACO or on that listserv. So I'd like to be able to send it to them.
Yeah.
It's currently on the city website. There's a highlighted box on the city website that has a direct link to the survey. You can click right on the city website and get right into the survey.
Thank you.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
For those people who need it in Spanish or Amharic or French, how are they notified that it's available?
Through our, we work with our, particularly Grace Wiggins, our housing person, and we will be sending out information to the folks we normally do when we have information like this that we send out. In particular, if you know, we ask you also to help us get the information out.
Great, thanks.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that came up tonight is the community engagement. And if folks have been listening to the council deliberations on our priorities, this is, figuring out the best ways to reach out to members of the community. This is one of our top priorities. And so right now we're doing the channels we've done before, but we can always, do better. And so if folks also have ideas of how to get information out to different groups in our city, please let us know. 8:15. All right, so we're not so bad. 15 minutes late after being Zoom bombed tonight, I think I'm going to call this one a success. So thank you, everyone, for participating. This is the first time we did this with the breakout rooms. I think it was kind of fun. I don't know, that I hope people enjoyed it, got an opportunity to discuss these issues a little bit more than when we have sort of the webinar meeting.